A pale sun falls over the rolling fields near Alton, casting soft shadows that dissolve into the tall grass. In those quiet hours, innocence and evil would meet in a place few noticed. Most townsfolk believed they lived in the safest corner of Hampshire. Yet behind the hush of that late summer afternoon in 1867 lay a moment so horrifying it would echo across centuries. How could a simple walk on a country lane turn into one of the most haunting tragedies in England's memory? In mid-19th century Britain, childhood was a fragile concept. Families large and small labored to put food on the table, and youngsters often roamed freely, especially in rural communities. Alton, a market town nestled in the Hampshire countryside, provided a picturesque backdrop of green hills and winding streams. Fanny Adams was the lively daughter of a local bricklayer, an 8-year-old known for giggles that could brighten any street. Life in Alton wasn't extravagant, but for the most part, it was honest and routine. Villagers shared a common faith in neighborly kindness and in the gentle pace of daily life. No one imagined that all these values, all this trust, could be undone in a single, unthinkable act of cruelty. On Saturday, August 24, 1867, a shimmering summer sun bathed the countryside in warmth. For Fanny, it was just another day of excitement. School was out, and she ventured from her house with her younger sister Lizzie and a friend named Minnie to explore the nearby meadows. This was a routine for children in Alton, who often wandered beyond the dusty lanes in search of adventure or a patch of woodland for hide-and-seek. The mood was buoyant, with laughter punctuating their stroll. As they ambled along, likely collecting wildflowers or chasing each other in childish glee, they encountered a man dressed neatly, carrying a slender cane. He introduced himself to them in a friendly manner, though something about his eagerness to talk might have felt slightly off. This man was Frederick Baker, a solicitor's clerk whose calm demeanor belied darker impulses. At first, it was a casual interaction. Baker smiled, asked the girls about their day, offered them money for sweets. Minnie later recalled that Fanny hesitated. Perhaps she sensed something amiss. Baker pressed on, complimenting the children's flower bouquets or braids, his tone light but persistent. Fanny, maybe swayed by the coin he produced, or simply lulled by the innocent banter, agreed to walk a short distance with him. Minnie and Lizzie, uninterested or wary, quickly dashed off in another direction. In the soft glow of afternoon sunshine, Fanny followed Baker into a remote area beyond the hedgerow. It would be the last time any of her family saw her alive. When Minnie and Lizzie returned home, their mother asked where Fanny was. They explained she had gone with that man, but no alarm bells rang out at first. Adults in 19th century Alton often allowed children a degree of freedom. Evening approached, however, and as Fanny failed to appear for supper, concern grew. Mrs. Adams rallied neighbors to search the lanes, the fields, and every small nook. They hoped Fanny had simply lost track of time picking berries. Despite the initial optimism, as darkness descended, an eerie tension took hold. The fields that had seemed so lovely a few hours before now felt suffocating, their shadows full of unspoken dread. At some point, a local farmer stumbled upon a heartbreaking sight. He found scattered fragments of a child's clothing and something else that made him recoil, a glimpse of flesh in a nearby ditch. Stricken by horror, he raised the alarm. The entire village convulsed in shock, and within moments word reached the authorities. When the pieces of evidence were pieced together under the dim lantern light, it became tragically clear that Fanny Adams had met a fate so brutal that even hardened constables struggled to maintain composure. They tried to keep the details from the public, particularly from Fanny's mother. Yet rumors flew faster than any official statement could contain them. By midnight, Alton was no longer that drowsy market town. It was a place in mourning, tormented by an unanswerable question. Who could commit such a monstrous act? As the grim reality solidified, suspicion fell on Frederick Baker. Several townspeople had seen him wandering aimlessly that afternoon. Minnie and Lizzie's recollections pinpointed him as the last adult in Fanny's presence. One witness even mentioned seeing Baker wash his hands in a nearby stream around twilight, which at the time seemed like a harmless act but took on a sinister significance now. The police managed to find him working in his office later that night, seemingly composed. Yet, inside his diary, an entry dated August 24th read, "Killed a young girl. It was fine and hot." A more chilling confession could hardly be imagined. The arrest was swift. Baker offered little immediate resistance, but he provided no coherent explanation for what he had done. The entire community reeled, grappling with the immediacy of their rage and the depth of their heartbreak. Parents held their children close. Grown men wept openly in the streets. Fanny's father, overwhelmed by despair and fury, had to be restrained from taking justice into his own hands. Locals whispered in hushed tones that this crime was something out of a nightmare rather than the quiet fields of Alton. In the initial days following Baker's arrest, a wave of rumors swept through the region. Some people claimed Baker had a history of violence, though concrete evidence was scarce. A few speculated he suffered from some undisclosed mental affliction. Others simply branded him evil incarnate, a man born with a black heart. What no one could reconcile was that he came from a relatively stable background. He'd been employed as a solicitor's clerk, had a basic education, and was viewed by colleagues as introverted, but not outwardly menacing. For Alton residents, the notion that Baker was simply one of us, albeit a bit quieter, gnawed at their sense of security. The coroner's inquest began, revealing unimaginable details. Medical experts spoke in strained voices, describing the damage inflicted upon Fanny's body, and in the packed hearing room, grown men and women fainted at the sheer horror. This was not just a murder, it was an act so vicious that the Victorian sense of propriety was undone. The media latched onto the story with a ferocity seldom seen, splashing sensational headlines that left readers gasping. If Alton had hoped for a private grieving period, that hope was extinguished by the national appetite for shocking news. Baker's defense insisted on questioning his mental state. They argued he was prone to fits of mania, perhaps triggered by stress or unknown traumas. But many found the explanation insufficient. One local official retorted, "Madness might dull the moral compass, but it cannot create such intent out of nothing." Others suggested that no rational or scientific reasoning would ever be enough to comprehend the cruelty inflicted on an 8-year-old child. Even the presiding magistrates, normally stoic, appeared shaken. Baker remained mostly silent, his courtroom demeanor unnervingly calm. Outside the court, crowds gathered, brandishing signs that called for swift and merciless punishment. The townspeople's fury was directed not just at Baker, but also at a societal structure that felt ill-equipped to prevent such atrocities. "She was only 8, a tearful woman sobbed to a reporter, echoing the grief of a whole community. Vigilantes threatened to storm the jail, eager to avenge Fanny's death without waiting for due process. Tensions ran so high that local authorities had to transfer Baker to Winchester for his own safety, and Alton sank further into sorrow. As the trial date approached, families across England braced themselves for the appalling revelations that were sure to resurface. Baker's lawyer tried to plant seeds of doubt, suggesting there was no direct eyewitness to the murder. But the diary entry was damning, and the physical evidence was overwhelming. Moreover, the testimonies of Minnie and Lizzie, though given with the trembling voices of traumatized children, painted a clear picture. They had seen their friend wander away with the polite but insistent stranger. That singular moment, one that might have seemed innocuous to many rural folks accustomed to trusting passers-by, was all it took to destroy Fanny's life forever. The prosecution meticulously laid out every detail, from Baker's suspicious behavior before the murder to the gruesome discovery of the remains. Doctors, farmers, neighbors, all stood before the jury to recount what they had seen or heard. Even the court transcripts of the time, typically reserved in language, could not disguise the horror. When pressed about his actions, Baker claimed memory loss or confusion, but these statements were unconvincing. He never cried or displayed evident remorse, a fact that struck observers as inhuman. Or perhaps he was simply in shock. No one could say for sure. In a matter of days, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty of willful murder. Baker's sentencing was straightforward. He would hang. Even so, some corners of society questioned whether capital punishment could truly address the underlying darkness that had led to such an act. Newspapers printed lengthy editorials, some calling for a reevaluation of how mental health issues were understood, and others demanding even harsher penalties for crimes against children. Yet most people in Alton and beyond felt that no sentence, however extreme, could rectify what had been done. Their only consolation was the faint hope that justice, however incomplete, would bring a degree of closure. On the morning of December 24, 1867, Frederick Baker was led to the gallows at Winchester. It was a cold, somber day. A crowd of onlookers assembled, some out of a sense of moral duty, others out of morbid curiosity. The hush that fell as the executioner prepared his noose was as chilling as any cold wind. Baker was permitted a final statement, but he offered only vague remarks about repenting for his sins. Moments later, the trapdoor opened, and with it, perhaps, a final exhalation of rage and disbelief from those who had waited months to see him pay for what he'd done. Many returned home with heavy hearts, asking themselves whether anything had truly been resolved, or if the memory of Fanny's laughter would forever ring with sorrow. Fanny's family was left to gather the fragments of their lives. They buried their daughter beneath a modest headstone, a place where Lizzie would sometimes leave fresh flowers. But they couldn't bury the trauma or the anger. Mr. Adams, once a stoic laborer who took pride in his bricks and mortar, found himself haunted by nightmares, while Mrs. Adams fell into prolonged fits of crying and silence. Their neighbors attempted to console them, to help them find any semblance of routine, yet the emptiness in their household was a permanent wound. Even the vibrant fields around Alton, where children once roamed freely, appeared subdued, as though nature itself mourned the loss of that bright spirit. Word of the crime and trial spread far beyond Hampshire, igniting fierce debates in newspapers from London to Manchester. Some critics lambasted the sensational reporting that dwelled on the case's gore, accusing the press of profiting from collective horror. Others pointed to the tragedy as evidence that Britain needed more rigorous approaches to mental health and stricter measures for child protection. In local taverns and private parlors, people argued about whether the legal system had truly served the interests of justice or merely performed a ritual of retribution. A handful of progressive voices wondered aloud. If Baker had been genuinely insane, did hanging him solve the deeper social problem of untreated mental illness? Meanwhile, conservatives insisted that only the gallows could serve as a suitable deterrent, especially when the victim was a defenseless child. Over time, the name Fanny Adams took on a life of its own. Sailors in the Royal Navy, upon receiving rations of tinned mutton that looked unpleasant, grimly coined the phrase "Sweet Fanny Adams" to indicate something worthless or distasteful. This macabre bit of slang would eventually slip into everyday English usage to mean nothing at all. It's a bitter legacy for a child whose life ended so violently. The case also accelerated discussions about safeguarding children in rural areas. Parents became more vigilant, no longer as quick to trust a stranger's kind face. Legislators, moved by public outrage, began drafting more comprehensive laws around child protection, although true reform was slow to materialize. Fanny's story, in effect, became a cautionary tale woven into the fabric of Victorian England, a grim reminder of the vulnerability of childhood and the lengths to which evil can sometimes go. When we reflect on this case now, it's impossible not to feel the weight of unanswerable questions. Could someone have intervened a moment earlier? Could a passing neighbor have seen the danger in Baker's eyes? Or is this kind of tragedy beyond the realm of prevention, a reflection of the unpredictable darkness lurking in certain souls? Fanny's murder ended not just a young life, but also an era of innocence in Alton, a sense that children could roam free without a second thought. In the wake of the crime, entire families learned to look over their shoulders, to hold on to their little ones more tightly. The memory of that bright, laughing girl, gone far too soon, refuses to fade. Even now, a century and a half later, her story speaks to the delicate balance between trust and caution, innocence and malice. Can you imagine seeing your child run off to play, never suspecting that a pleasant summer day could mask the unthinkable? That single horrific act cast a long shadow over a simple market town and left a permanent imprint on our collective consciousness. In trying to understand it, we confront the unsettling truth that sometimes there is no understanding, only empathy for a grief that never really heals, and the small consolation of remembering the smile of a girl who deserved a far kinder fate.